Everybody loves curling up on a comfy sofa with a nice warm blanket. But I noticed recently that there's two problems with blankets when you're trying to do that. The first problem is when you try to snuggle the blanket up around your neck, it bunches up here and it kind of wants to pull itself down because this stuff is in the way right here. And the second, even more annoying problem is that even if you have your feet comfortably tucked in at the bottom, the minute that you move, your feet come untucked. The Ultimate Comfy Couch Quilt has two features that solve these two problems. First of all, it has a foot pocket, so your feet can't pop out. And second of all, it has a cutout in the top that fits up to your neck and wraps over your shoulders. And so now it doesn't want to pull down, and you stay comfy and warm from shoulders to toes. Now I'm going to show you how to make it. I wanted to make a pair of comfy couch quilts for my mom and dad. And my dad is 6'4" and my mom is 5'4", so I made them two different sizes. So when I'm making the quilt to begin with, I measure the person that I'm making it for from their chin to their toes, and then I add 18 inches, and that's the length of my quilt. And since I knew I was going to be cutting a big chunk out of the side of each of these quilts, I decided not to make really fancy quilts. Instead, I just used my 1 hour quilt top book, made 2 quilt tops really fast and easy. Another thing I did to make these quilts super cozy is that instead of putting batting and regular fabric on the back, I got a fuzzy blanket and had my quilter quilt the top to the fuzzy blanket. If you decide to do this, you'll probably need to sew leaders of regular fabric onto the ends of the blanket so that your quilter can clip them to the frame. Another alternative would be to use batting and flannel, or to use minky on the back. You can see on these quilts that I used the leftover from the dark blue blanket to make the foot pocket. And since there wasn't any leftover on the green blanket, I used some of the leftover of the blue blanket to make the foot pocket on the green blanket too. When I cut the fabric for the foot pocket, I cut it from the corner of the quilt so that 2 of the edges, this edge right here and the top edge, already had a hem in it. And then on the right hand side here, I just cut the pocket a little bit wider, about 1 inch wider than the finished size I wanted. And I zigzagged that edge under. The next step is to center the foot pocket on the bottom of the quilt. So just fold the foot pocket in half, then fold the quilt in half, match up the centers, and then you're going to leave the raw edge of the foot pocket on the outer edge of the quilt because you'll catch that in the binding. And then just pin the edges up here, and then I used a zigzag stitch to just run down each edge. A zigzag stitch is good because it has some flexibility in it, so it won't pop and it's strong. And yes, the stitches are going to show on the front of the quilt. Remember, this is a cuddle quilt, not a prize-winning quilt, so don't be too precious about stitches. If you really wanted to, you could hand stitch the foot pocket on, but I've found in my experience that hand stitching is not as strong as machine stitching, and I've actually stuck my foot through hand-stitched pockets before. One thing you want to do to make sure that this is really secure is, just come in here so you can see this, stitch up and across about 1/2 inch and then down so that you have a nice stable corner here, because that corner is going to take a lot of stress when you put your feet into the pocket. I put the foot pocket on the quilt first because the next step is I take it to the person I'm making the quilt for and I have them stick their feet in the pocket. Then I take the top of the quilt and I bring it up and I just put a pin right here at the bottom of their chin, and then that tells me how deep I'm going to cut down into the quilt to make that U shape that's going to go over their shoulders. So the next step is just to cut out the neck. Now, I'm showing this quilt after it's finished, so the binding is on. But at this point, the binding would not be on, and all you would do is, here's your quilt folded in half, there's the pin that marks the length, and then you can take a couple of pins and mark that curve. It doesn't have to be anything special. All I did with this is I just went in here with scissors and I whacked out a curve, just like that. I didn't even measure it. But it should be about 4 or 5 inches deep from the fold to this edge right here. So that gives you about 8 or 10 inches to fit around the person's neck. The last step is just to put the binding on. And for these quilts, I like to put the binding on the back and then fold it over to the front. That way you just get, it's just a little easier to deal with the bulk that way. I was a little worried about how the binding would work going around that inner curve on the neck, but what I discovered is if you just pull the curve out so that it's flat and just put the binding on it as if it were a straight line, you won't have any problem at all. And that's it. Your ultimate comfy quilt is done.